10 years after the 2008 financial crisis, the economy is booming with record low unemployment. Yet, one area is still a problem: student loan debt. Graduation, the culmination of many years of hard work, but already it's a source of frustration for many DePaul students. For Good at DePaul, this is Varsha Kadamandla. The poll by ABC News and Washington Post found 51% of Americans disapprove of Kavanaugh being on the Supreme Court, while 41% approve. It's being called the Justice Department's largest ever college admission cheating prosecution, an extensive investigation that involved some 200 agents nationwide, resulting in charges against 50 people in 6 states. Meanwhile, LGBTQ community around the country have been protesting for this possible change in policy. No word yet if the administration will go ahead and officially try to implement that policy. For Good at DePaul, this is Varsha Kadamandla. The nation remains divided over recently confirmed Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh accused of sexual assault in high school by Dr. Christine Blasey Ford. According to a new poll by the Washington Post and ABC News, a majority of Americans don't approve of Kavanaugh and would support an additional investigation into his conduct. DePaul political science professor Ben Epstein says the hearings were significant in many different ways.
But he was extremely partisan. And my concern is that when you're a justice on the Supreme Court, you're supposed to be, as much as possible, above politics.
DePaul's Panhellenic Council President Ali Cloth and the university's Vice President for Community Wellness Kate Graham are both concerned that despite Blasey Ford's testimony, Kavanaugh was still confirmed.
And we think that this kind of shows like the worst case scenario of what can happen when a woman comes forward with her story.
Cloth says the Kavanaugh controversy is spurring women to share their stories of sexual abuse.
People found it empowering, and they are using this as a reason or a segue to stand up and share their stories and get the support that they deserve that maybe they didn't feel comfortable seeking out before.
Many DePaul students were upset with the Kavanaugh confirmation.
I'm extremely offended by it.
I'm not shocked that he was approved based on the lack of sufficient evidence, but it's still saddening to think if these allegations are true that he was able to be nominated and approved.
I just don't think that it's right for somebody to have been accused of something and then still represent and make decisions for lots of women in the country.
On the other hand, some women support Kavanaugh.
I applaud women who are able to come out and have the bravery to share that. But in this instance, we're looking at allegations and simply allegations.
The poll by ABC News and the Washington Post found 51% of Americans disapprove of Kavanaugh being on the Supreme Court, while 41% approve. The poll also found that a majority of people believed the Senate Judiciary Committee did not do enough to investigate the allegations of sexual assault against Kavanaugh. Experts say that the process was so controversial that it may impact the midterm elections. For Good at DePaul, this is Varsha Kadamandla. DePaul's class of 2019 commencement is months away, but the university recently announced some changes that will impact students. Last year, many students complained because they could not get as many tickets as they wanted for graduation. Now, each student will receive 6 guest tickets, one more than last year. And for the first time, they will have to pay for their cap and gown. $67 for undergraduate students, $101 for graduate students, and $125 for PhD students. These new costs surprised and bothered some students.
I would be more motivated to attend graduation if I didn't have to buy my own cap and gown.
Salona Oliver is just a sophomore, but is already concerned about having to pay for her cap and gown in 2 years.
Since it's not like I can walk without a cap and gown, I would think as much money as my tuition is, that would be the one thing that they would provide for us that would be normal.
SGA Senator McKay Murphy says they are working to enhance ticket availability and cut costs for students.
We want students to be able to get as many tickets as they need to have the family members that they love come and see them graduate without spending another arm and a leg to get some more tickets.
In a return statement, the university events director Jennifer Karma detailed the reasons why students will have to pay for their cap and gowns. Faced with continually rising costs for commencement exercises, this will be the first year DePaul is asking graduates to pay for regalia. As we move toward implementing a practice used by many institutions, we worked hard to negotiate prices that are in line with or below what students at other institutions pay. It is important for students to know that unlike other universities, DePaul will not charge a graduation fee. International student Shashwata Sridhar is not happy about the 6-ticket limit or paying for her cap and gown.
As an international student, I come from a very big family, and everybody is going to want to come from India to see me walk on convocation day. So an increase from 5 to 6 tickets really doesn't make such a big difference to me.
Graduation, the culmination of many years of hard work, but already it's a source of frustration for many DePaul students. For Good at DePaul, this is Varsha Kadamandla. 10 years after the 2008 financial crisis, the economy is booming with record low unemployment. Yet, one area is still a problem: student loan debt. The Federal Reserve reports that the student loan debt has reached an all-time high of $1.52 trillion. That's a 145% increase from where it was 10 years ago. And that raises the question, what can be done about this continuing problem? DePaul economics professor Robert Kalin says several factors are involved.
There has to be a day of reckoning in higher ed where the tuition and the expenses have to be curtailed.
Recent statistics show that more than 44 million people have student loan debt, totaling about $1.5 trillion. And for college graduates from 2017, those with loans owe about $40,000 on average. DePaul financial expert Natalie Daniels says most of the students here are able to pay back their loans.
DePaul has an under 3% default rate, so a lot of people are paying back their loans. There's not that many loans that are going into default.
DePaul senior Anna Lewis says she's worried about her student loan debt.
I'm planning on going into the social service industry, and that isn't big money there. So it's something that's on my mind a lot right now, actually.
DePaul freshman Madeline Fesses is also concerned.
I think student debt is a huge problem because students, if they don't have parents to help them pay for school, then once they get out, they're deep, tens of thousands of dollars that will take them years to pay off.
Most observers feel something must be done about the student debt crisis, but the problem is very few people seem to have a good solution. For Good at DePaul, this is Varsha Kadamandla.
Tell me what you want, what you really want. Justice! Tell me what you need, what you really need.
A new report says that the Trump administration may roll back protections for transgender people. The New York Times reports that the administration is considering a plan to define gender as, quote, a biological, immutable condition determined by genitalia at birth. That would mean people would only be considered male or female in federal programs. That would be a major setback for transgenders. The Obama administration had loosened the legal concept of gender in federal programs, recognizing gender largely as an individual's choice and not determined by the sex assigned at birth. DePaul's Professor Ann Russo, who teaches women and gender studies, talks about how this policy would affect the LGBTQ community.
This kind of policy would say that there are only 2 categories of people in terms of gender and sexuality, and that they must conform to whatever they've decided those completely opposed and polarized opposites are.
DePaul freshman Taylor Hartley feels such a policy would be unfair to transgenders.
At least I see a pattern with this administration in going after minorities and groups of people who have been oppressed and struggled and bullied multiple times and just knocking them down.
Caitlin Pepper, a film major at DePaul, also would oppose to such a policy.
It's completely awful to think that anyone should be not considered who they really are by the government or by other people in the world.
It's going to perpetuate discrimination at all levels, from birth to death.
But Gregory Angelillo, the national president of Log Cabin Republicans, a group that works within the Republican Party to advocate rights for the LGBTQ community, feels there are different ways to look at this issue.
We have court rulings around the country that are divided on this point, and I believe rather than have this issue decided by the Supreme Court ultimately, the administration has sought to come up with its own definition, and that's why, at Log Cabin Republicans, we are advocating for federal legislation that specifically addresses sexual orientation and gender identity.
Meanwhile, LGBTQ community around the country have been protesting for this possible change in policy. No word yet if the administration will go ahead and officially try to implement that policy. For Good at DePaul, this is Varsha Kadamandla. On April 17, 2011, the first episode of Game of Thrones aired. Who would know then that the show, which is now in its 8th and final season, would eventually have a massive global fan base. In fact, according to New York Times, it's the most popular show in HBO's history and one of the most watched shows of the last decade. If you include its digital viewership, its most recent season averaged more than 30 million viewers an episode. This is Michael Abraham, who became a fan of Game of Thrones by reading its book.
So many shows, so many stories in general are a little bit more static in that, you know, there's the good guys and the bad guys, right? And you kind of get a sense for how things are going. I think Game of Thrones really came in and kind of crushed that typical way of telling stories.
The show is an adaptation of George R.R. Martin's best-selling book series, A Song of Ice and Fire. It's won more Emmys than any other dramatic series ever, including Best Drama 3 times. Game of Thrones depicts two powerful families, kings and queens, knights and renegades, liars and honest men, playing a deadly game for control of the 7 kingdoms of Westeros, and to sit atop the Iron Throne. And in this, its final season, bars throughout the world, like Final Throne Chicago in Old Town on the north side, have been holding Game of Thrones theme nights with people dressed in characters from the show and taking pictures on their own recreations of the throne. Students here at DePaul explain why they love Game of Thrones.
It's fantasy, it's long term, it's intricate with the details of the characters and the storyline.
I like that the show is not afraid to kill off characters that it's caused us to love. I think that's a great metaphor for reality.
I really love Game of Thrones. There's a lot of things going on. It's a huge storyline. There's just so many things to follow.
As Game of Thrones draws to a close, it's definitely changed TV in many ways. From its story to its CGI, computer-generated imagery, it's become one of the most talked about shows in recent years. For Good at DePaul, this is Varsha Kadamandla.